On the eastern banks of the Tigris lies a city once steeped in prehistoric grandeur. If you've read the Bible, you might consider this city the setting of a miracle, where Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of a deep-sea beast before preaching to the people of Nineveh. This was the cultural, religious, and political heart of the Assyrian Empire, a civilization famed for its art, but remembered for its remorseless cruelty. The Assyrians got a taste of that cruelty in 612 BC by a coalition of Babylonian, Median, and Scythian forces, and Nineveh went to sleep in the dust of history. In 2014, that ancient dust was stirred once more. The shadows of the past returned in the form of the Islamic State, in what you might call a symbolic mirror image of Nineveh. On the western banks of the Tigris, opposite the ruins of Nineveh, the city has a name, Mosul. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button. It goes a long way towards helping out with information dissemination by making this video reach more people. Also, hit the notification button to get more of our content as soon as it is posted. Thank you. The prophet Nahum called Nineveh the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder. This would prove to be true about Nineveh's offspring in June 2014, when Islamic State fighters came calling. Led by Abu al-Bilawi and crammed on pickup trucks, they attacked strategic targets in the city and forcing most of the severely depleted Iraqi army to flee. Though the army was officially known to have 30,000 soldiers and an equal number of federal police, the actual combat strength was estimated at only 500 soldiers due to widespread desertion. Also, so many names on the list were fictitious personnel on payroll. The Iraqi token force was quickly overwhelmed. Key commanders ordered a hasty and disorganized retreat. Of the more than 2 million people who lived in Mosul before its capture, less than 500,000 could escape. In 632 AD, the moment the Prophet Muhammad died, his followers fell into a dispute over succession. 2 factions arose. One group was the Sunni, who believed leadership should be based on consensus and merit. They backed Abu Bakr, the Prophet's close friend, believing the community should choose the best man for the job. The other was the Shia, who believed leadership is a divine birthright. They backed Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, believing the leadership of Islam must stay within the Prophet's bloodline, the Imams. This dispute lasted for over 1,000 years, and the culture of segregation it created was almost similar to that of race. In Iraq, the Shia make up about 60% of the population, but under the late dictator Saddam Hussein, they were second-class citizens. Saddam, who was a Sunni himself, consolidated power among the Sunni minority, who made up just about 20% of the country's population. The Shia Muslims and other minorities were oppressed, suppressed, and tortured. His government was responsible for the deaths or disappearances of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, particularly Shia Muslims and Kurdish rebels. These people chafed under his brutal regime, and in 2003 the US invaded. American tanks raced through the country, captured Baghdad, toppled Saddam, and organized the elections which saw a Shia government get elected. The Sunnis then became the second-class citizens, losing the power and influence they enjoyed under Saddam. In 2011, the United States pulled out its troops from Iraq, and just as soon as they left, the state collapsed. The Shia government was widely distrusted by the Sunnis, who were the dominant group in the northern part of the country. Armed insurgents rose up in rebellion, and the government clamped down on dissident factions, including Sunni Muslims. Major Sunni leaders were arrested and persecuted, and Shia military officers replaced Sunni ones to prevent the likelihood of a coup. Local Sunni militias were disbanded, and the marginalization of Sunnis was at an all-time high. The whole situation was a powder keg that blew up in 2014 when the newly formed ISIS, under their leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, declared the beginning of a caliphate spanning Iraq and Syria. Al-Baghdadi made this declaration in the Great Mosque in Mosul. Shortly after, ISIS and Sunni fighters advanced on Mosul, overrunning and flushing out the Iraqi defenders. Captured soldiers were summarily executed, their methods gruesomely similar to those employed by the ancient Assyrians, who hanged, burned, and impaled their victims. About 1,500 fighters were able to take Mosul because the soldiers didn't want to die for a population that hated them, and the population didn't want to fight for a government that they didn't trust. Lacking the numbers, initiative, and ammunition, the Iraqi military beat a furious retreat. Most defensive forces either fled or joined the opposition. The victorious fighters captured the prison, liberated about 1,000 prisoners, and in 4 days the city completely fell. They didn't stop at Mosul. ISIS continued south and west with terrifying speed and took Tikrit, Ramadi, and threatened Baghdad. Fighters crossed the border into Syria, which was caught in the confusion of a civil war, and captured large swathes of territory for their caliphate. Then they struck north into Kurdish and Yazidi territory, taking Sinjar and Erbil and committing atrocities. They killed thousands, sold women into slavery, and draped the black flag of ISIS over government buildings. Life in Mosul and other ISIS-occupied cities was stripped of colour, in a cultural cleansing of sorts that demolished both cultural and historical sites, as well as the rights and freedoms of women and ethnic minorities. Militants took sledgehammers to Assyrian statues that were 3,000 years old. Idolatry had to be purged, they said. The Mosul Public Library was burned, and thousands of manuscripts turned to ash. Ancient city ruins were levelled with bulldozers and explosives, and history was desecrated. The desecration of women was worse. They were all forced to wear the niqab, covering everything but the eyes. Eventually, double-layered veils were enforced to hide the eyes themselves. Showing any hint of skin was seen as tempting the men. Women caught doing such were publicly lashed. A woman couldn't leave her home without a male guardian. A woman couldn't breastfeed in public. A woman couldn't go to school. A woman was nothing, a ghost without a man to give her identity. Women were sold in slave markets with notarized contracts of ownership. It was despicable. Within 2 years of ISIS rule in Mosul, the city's population dropped by more than 1 million. Most of the people who fled were Armenians, Yazidis, Assyrians, Turkmen, and Shabaks, all of whom suffered under Sunni rule. In 2016, however, ISIS had taken punches from the rapidly reorganized Iraqi army. That year saw it almost completely kicked out of Iraq, with Mosul as the only stronghold left in the country. The combined Joint Task Force's Operation Inherent Resolve, led by units from the US Marine Corps and other American Special Forces, had been doing a hard but successful job in training the Iraqi forces in counterinsurgency, and they were learning. So their marksmanship and discipline improved. They stopped fleeing in front of the enemy, but a shortage of experienced NCOs still hindered long-term effectiveness, so they continued to fight with the Marines, taking on supervision roles. Dubbed Operation We Are Coming, Nineveh. The Battle of Mosul was the largest conventional land battle since the capture of Baghdad in 2003. About 110,000 soldiers were to retake the city. Most of them Iraqi troops, with a few American, British, Canadian, German, Turkish, Australian, French and Dutch troops serving various roles in the Joint Task Force. Awaiting the coalition was a force of between 5,000 to 7,000 ISIS insurgents, with foreign fighters from Chechnya and Tunisia. They were armed with rifles, machine guns and other heavy assault vehicles taken from the Iraqi security forces. IEDs were stashed everywhere in the city, and tunnels were dug from street to street for concealed movement. The Battle of Mosul was slated to commence in mid-October, but the weeks before were spent giving ISIS total hell. US Marines emplaced and manned 4 howitzer artillery pieces at Firebase Bell, about 15 miles from ISIS lines. From there, they pounded the insurgents every day without mercy, using high-explosive, smoke and illumination rounds. Airstrikes were launched to take out key ISIS leaders and destroy weapons caches. On the 16th day of October, the mother of all battles was underway. Mosul was to be taken via encirclement in a multi-pronged assault, with Peshmerga Kurdish fighters to advance on the city from the northeast. The bulk of the assault would come from the south, where the Iraqi army units were deployed. Iraqi special forces would attack from the east, hitting the interior of the city when the outer defences had been knocked out. Some units of the Iraqi army would then swing west to cut off a possible line of retreat to Syria. The battle started with a full day of artillery strikes from Firebase Bell. US Marines fired 155mm shells at ISIS positions, and at 6 a.m. on the 17th, Iraqi army tanks slowly but surely moved into the outskirts of Mosul. The Peshmerga, in the Qasir region, east of Mosul, simultaneously advanced on ISIS-held villages from 3 fronts. The insurgents, realizing the scale of the assault, began firing rockets on Peshmerga fighters. The fighting in that sector was fierce, especially in Bartella, about 22 kilometers east of Mosul. The town was taken after a day of fighting, with 200 insurgents reported killed. ISIS fighters shaved their beards and ditched their Afghan uniforms to blend in among the civilian population, who were being evacuated by humanitarian corridors. On the southern front, Iraqi troops retook several villages near Qayyara, including 56 oil fields in the district. The Peshmerga met less resistance than the Iraqi forces, and the latter's advance had been slowed down during the same day due to suicide bombers, roadside IEDs, and oil fires. ISIS also deployed a large number of snipers, and this proved troublesome for the Allied forces who were carrying out street-by-street search operations to clear out insurgents from the outskirts of Mosul city. The Peshmerga eventually had to halt their advance to wait for the Iraqi army to catch up. As coalition forces advanced on Mosul from all sides, rebellion broke out in the city, though ISIS forces put down the revolts within a couple of days. The Iraqi army caught up with the Peshmerga, and fighting resumed on the 19th of October. Shia militias and other Iraqi troops in the west effectively cut off the insurgents' line of escape to Syria by capturing the highway, and the fighting switched to dense urban warfare. By November 1st, units of the Iraqi counter-terrorism service had begun to lead the assault into East Mosul. These hard men were the cream of the crop of the Iraqi military, having gone through rigorous training by American troops. They wore black uniforms and went house by house, clearing every room, sealing tunnels and holding captured neighborhoods against car bomb attacks. ISIS had gotten more innovative with their IEDs. They would load cars full of explosives and nail steel plates to make the car resistant to small arms fire. This, plus the deployment of snipers on every rooftop, made the fighting intense, but by the end of January, East Mosul had been fully liberated. West Mosul was a different matter altogether. The Tigris River was a natural barrier, and the coalition had to take out bridges to stop ISIS from sending vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, VBIEDs, across. The old city saw the worst of the fighting. It was a labyrinth of ancient stone, built beside the ruins of Nineveh, and as such was too narrow for tanks to pass. Iraqi troops had to dismount and take the fighting to the enemy on foot. Brutal hand-to-hand combat ensued in corners too close-quartered for rifles. Troops called in airstrikes, but command denied the request. She's because ISIS did something that the Assyrians of old were known for. They herded thousands of civilians into the city centre to serve as living armour. The message was clear. Kill us, but kill the innocent too. The liberation of Mosul entered its most violent chapter in the March 2017. As coalition air power intensified to break the deadlock, the density of the urban landscape made precision nearly impossible. On March 17th, a single strike in the Al Jadida district ignited an ISIS munitions cache, killing over 200 civilians and injuring hundreds more. Despite the carnage, the Iraqi security forces pushed forward. The federal police seized the government complex, while the elite counter-terrorism service moved deeper into the labyrinthine old city. By late April, the ISIS Caliphate was a tiny pocket pinned against the Tigris River. The human toll was catastrophic. The UN estimated that over 700,000 people fled the Western offensive alone. Those trapped inside faced a triad of horrors: starvation, lack of water, and the constant threat of execution by ISIS for collaboration. Brutal fighting continued till June. Soldiers fought house to house on foot, under fire from snipers and grenade-dropping drones. ISIS insurgents had to be flushed out street by street, but they were eventually taken out. Coalition forces closed in on the final stronghold, the Great Mosque of al-Nuri, the very place where al-Baghdadi declared his caliphate 3 years ago. Seeing the battle was lost, ISIS leadership ordered the mosque to be destroyed up in a final act of cruelty against history and heritage. On June 21, 2017, the 800-year-old Great Mosque of al-Nuri, with its iconic al-Hadba minaret, was blown up. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi declared this destruction a formal declaration of defeat. On July 9, 2017, after 9 months of relentless combat, victory was officially declared. The cost of victory was immense, and the liberation left a wake of unprecedented destruction. The counter-terrorism squad lost nearly 40% of its personnel. Civilian death estimates vary, from the UN's 8,000 to local reports of over 20,000. Approximately 1,200 Iraqi security force members were killed, and 8,000 wounded, but they bled the enemy too. ISIS combatant deaths are estimated between 6,000 and 9,000. Over 40,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed, particularly in West Mosul. The city was labelled one of the most explosive contaminated environments on Earth. Recovery has been a slow, decades-long endeavour, hampered by bureaucratic corruption and sectarian tension. While the UNDP and international donors have restored thousands of homes and dozens of schools, West Mosul remained largely in ruins as late as 2019. By 2026, however, signs of resilience have emerged. Under UNESCO's Revive the Spirit of Mosul initiative, the minaret of al-Nuri Mosque was rebuilt with its famous architectural slouch intact. Its reconstruction delivers a stiff middle finger to the senseless nihilism of the Islamic State. The University of Mosul has reopened, and youth-led cultural festivals are reclaiming the city's identity. The Battle of Mosul ranks alongside Stalingrad or Grozny as textbook cases in modern warfare. ISIS no longer holds as much as a single square inch of territory, but they haven't vanished. They retreated into the deep desert and the mountains, operating as a shadow insurgency. The territorial caliphate was dismantled through steel and fire, but the true victory lies in the grueling multi-generational work of rebuilding trust and a pluralistic society.